In the class, we're not going to teach you how to design anything, but it is important to know certain aspects of the design. For example, you're going to want your design to be 100% K or black. The reason is because it just makes it easier for printing and the burning process later. You're going to print it onto a piece of paper we like to call transparency. Transparencies have two sides, a shiny and smooth side and a rough and gritty side. The rough and gritty side grabs ink very well and also adhesives. And be careful about getting tape on this side because it sticks very well. You also want to load the rough side facing you and load it into the printer. So now we are in the dark room, which is where we burn our transparencies onto a screen. Our screens are going to be in either this box or that box. And it will be labeled for factory 2 class use only. Ooh, that one has a design on it. You're not going to use that one. We're going to go on this box over here. So, when you grab a fresh screen out of the box, it's going to have a protective film on it. So, when you first get a screen, you're going to notice it has a protective film on it. And you're going to want to then take that off before doing anything else. If it sounds like static electricity, that means it's good and dry. If it sounds like tape and it's ripping it, you need to let it dry longer. Simply throw the protective film into the trash can and move on. You're going to want the flush side facing up. And you're going to want the slippery and shiny side facing upwards of the transparency. Also, do remember that the top of the screen is a smaller area and the bottom of the screen is a larger area. If you run into a screen in which you're both equal, then it doesn't matter, just make the decision on your own. You're gonna want it about 4 fingers from the top. This makes it easier later on in the screen printing process. The screen's dimensions are 20 by 24. So we're gonna go off of a middle of 10 inches to make sure our design is centered. Sometimes the transparencies will have registration marks that'll make it easier to line up, and they're basically little crosshairs, basically north, south, east, west directions that'll allow you to line it up perfectly. Since this one doesn't have any, we're gonna go off of what we feel is best the middle. And once we're comfortable where the 10 inches are, we can then rotate this and keep it on here like a paperweight. We're gonna grab some normal tape and tape the corners down onto the transparency. I would suggest you guys leave tabs. It makes the process much easier. That way you aren't wasting time picking it. So leaving tabs on the tape allows you to pick it off a lot easier. If your transparency is larger than the emulsion you're using, you either want to then use a screen that's coated with liquid emulsion, or if the design still fits within the emulsion, you're going to want to try to tape mostly on the transparency rather than the border or on the screen. Tape sticks much better to the transparency than anything else. So, after I got the opposite corners on, I can then tape the rest of the corners and I can hit the paperweight off. If you have a very long design, you're going to want to also get the middles, but since this is just a letter size, you don't have to worry about that. Once the transparency is taped onto your emulsion, you're then going to load it onto the vacuum table right here. And you want the transparency side down on the glass. And you want to make sure these rubber pads are on the opposite corners of each of the screen. And you also, it's important to know that the rubber pads are underneath the emulsion because they'll also block the light. And we don't want that. You're going to want to throw the rope on the inside and make sure it's coming out one end, going in one end and coming out the other. It doesn't have to be pressed up against the wall, but ideally you just want a rope in there that hugs one side. Once you have it on there, the rubber pads aren't blocking anything and the rope is in there, you want to then grab both clamps and pull it down, lock it in place, and then turn on the vacuum. Once the vacuum is on, we're looking for basically one thing. I like to wait for the corners to create pretty stiff tabs. That's how I know that the vacuum is nice and secure. You can also tell by a nice clean outline of the rope. It's important to leave the vacuum on until later. You do not want to turn it off and flip it. You want to leave the vacuum on. And we got the tab we're looking for, a nice little tag. We're going to push this lever out. Boom, flip it. So now you can see The transparency is here. This is the last time to check it. You want to make sure the words aren't eligible. It shouldn't be easily read. Actually, in this case, they should be because it's mirrored. So, when burning pink emulsion, you want to burn it for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You want to set a timer on your phone and then wait outside and come back in. At this point, just leave the room and you come back in. After it's burned, we're simply going to bring this down, lock it in place, and turn off the vacuum. Slowly lift this up, do not speedily lift this up, because what can end up happening is it can sometimes be basically adhesive residue on the surface of the metal, which can stick to the rubber, lifting the screw and dropping it. The last thing we want is to drop metal on glass. Take it out of the vacuum table and simply take off the tape. You simply set the transparency to the side, and then we take this screen to the washout booth. Okay, so at this point we are in the janitor's closet and we're at the washout booth. This is where we now wash out our screen. We want to have it on mist mode, and we're just going to gently push out a design. So basically what was happening earlier was everywhere the light was touching had a chemical reaction with the light. And it made the surrounding area non-water soluble, so it can't be washed out with water. It basically changed its properties. But the areas that were blocked, where the light couldn't reach, basically where our design was, never got that reaction. So it still is water soluble. So we're washing out a design in our emulsion, which will basically leave a hole in the emulsion in the shape of our design. Bit longer, just some hairs on it still. If a design doesn't have any super thin lines, you really don't have to worry about stuff. Once it has a bunch of thin lines, like for example, like wrinkles on a monkey's face or something, that's when it starts to cause problems. At this point, usually all I do is wipe off the metal, so it's not really much to report. But you know, you just want to wipe off the metal, that way dries a little quicker. You don't really want to wipe the screen. You can dab the screen if you desire, but you don't want to wipe it because it still is fragile and you could damage the emulsion. And then we go back to the dark room. At this point, after you wash out your design, we're simply just going to put it in front of the fan for about 15 minutes until it's completely dry, and then we'll move on to the second step. So, we're at the screen printing area at Factory 2, and while your screen is drying, it's ideal that you turn on the heat and the belt speed for the convey heater, because this will be necessary later on in the class. After your screen is completely dry, you'll notice by it being one cohesive color. That's how you know it's dry. Also, you shouldn't feel any moisture on it. After you do that, you want to then take it over here, and now we're going to tape up all the areas around the emulsion. I like to work in a counterclockwise or clockwise motion as we go around. Too long, but that's fine. Like that. Tape the entire perimeter. If there's any text you didn't want, you can also tape over that. Any part of the design you didn't want as well. Basically, we're just preventing the ink from going any place that we don't want it. So the only place we really want it to go is through our design. Sometimes you can do the sides, but depending on how small your design is, you don't need to do up the walls on every side. If you have a very wide design, I suggest it because the larger the squeegee you're using, more likely you're going to have ink on the sides and can possibly go up the metal. Makes cleanup a lot harder. At this point, we're going to take this to the light table. So, at the light table, we're looking for any pinholes, which are basically any white dots that are possibly on the surface. There's a couple down here that stick out a little bit, these little tiny white dots. And those can happen because basically anything also blocked light while we were burning, which can be from like dust to there is something on the transparency. And if you find those, you just want to tape over them. Make sure you leave a tab on the tape because ink can push through those. And if you have something with like a strong contrast, like black on white or white on black, you don't really want a lot of dots all over your t-shirt if they're not necessary. All your pinholes are taken care of. Then at this point, we're going to tape it on over here. And we're going to load it up. So, you want to make sure you hit the bottom of your screen towards the clamps. And you want to make sure the concave side is facing upwards. You're going to be using this T-square. And you're going to be going off of 8 inches. The reason you're going off of 8 inches is because this is 16 inches wide. And we're going off of the middle of this to find what we're looking for. Once we like where it is, I want to make sure we're pressed up against the back the whole time. Once we like the position it is, we're then going to slowly get both clamps on the metal. Then after they're both touching, then you want to clamp them at the same time. Reasoning for that is you don't want one clamp to shift it, so this keeps it in place. And at this point, you would pick out your ink color and grab a squeegee and goop scoop. It's quite small, so we can go with the small squeegee. And we're gonna wanna grab one of these yellow goop scoops right here. This will allow us just to move around the ink where we want it to go. The ink I'm using today is a very thin ink, so it's a lot easier to work with, but you'll find different brands and different colors have different viscosities. So the results will vary. So find what's most comfortable for you. So you just want to spread out the ink evenly before your design and have that ready. The ink is so thick you don't have to really worry about it sliding down the screen when it's up here. Do keep in mind that this has a bit of hydraulics, so it will fling up on you, so watch your chin. At this point, we're going to grab a test shirt. At this point, you want to make sure that your plant is sticky enough to hold your shirt in place. We're going to be using spray adhesive, so it's in a green bottle. You want to focus on the area where your design is going to be. Now you don't have to spray after every shirt. I would suggest spraying maybe every 15 or 10 shirts. You usually don't have to spray that often. You can just keep it moving. For now, we're going to be working on a test shirt that already has designs on that, and that's fine because it's just a test to make sure we get the process right. And anytime you're doing a shirt run, you want to always make sure you have spares. What I would usually do if there wasn't designs in the way is that I would pull the shirt all the way to the back. Always put your hand over here, just above your design, and bring the screen down. See where the top of your hand is, and that's how you know where the top of your design is. And at this point, we're going to be getting all the wrinkles out, and we're also going to be sticking it to the surface of the platen. So you want to put a little bit of force into it. When going for a flood, you want to move it at an angle. Not that much force. It depends on how thick the ink is. But you're looking for kind of like a frosting-like consistency on the surface. So you just want to gently pass it over in one continuous motion. And you just want to go right over your design. After the flood is done, now I want to go for a cut. A cut, you want to put both hands on, but if it's small enough, you can just do one. You want to make sure the screen is down and flat against the shirt. You're putting pressure on the middle of this one because how small it is. Keeping a slight angle on it, pushing down. So think of it like this action, like you're scooping into it as you're pushing down and you're pulling forward. Okay, after you do the cut, you want to make sure you don't leave any traces falling back onto your pattern. You want to lift it up. And there's your design. Depending on how sticky it is, you want to be careful not to stretch out your design. And keep in mind the ink is still wet. So if you aren't cautious about how you handle it, you can't smear it or transfer it. When I lay it on a conveyor belt, make sure it's flat and make sure there's no high points that could touch the metal. Once it passes through, it's perfectly fine to just let it fall into the bucket. If you're unsure whether the first pass was enough, you can always just touch it with like a pinky and check if there's any ink on it. There's no ink. And once you're secure, you can see it all. Usually one pass is enough. You can see that it is completely dry. I can't smear it, I can't scratch it. It's done. And this is ready to sell, this is ready to wash or whatever. At this point, you guys use your test shirt, and I'm gonna move on to the actual shirt. In the class you take, you'll also have shirts you take home after you do some test prints. That way you take home something you can be proud of that isn't your first cut. You know, something you can actually wear. So, I'm gonna repeat the last steps. I'm gonna go for a flood. Remember, waist against the screen to keep it up. If it's a wider squeegee, you wanna grab 2 hands. Since it's a smaller one, 1 is fine. And we're going for a frosting-like consistency in one go. It's flat against the shirt. We're gonna go for a cut. Just pressing down and dragging forward. And lay it on the conveyor belt. All right. Once the design itself has gone through the ringer, you can either wait for it to fall in the basket or grab it early. That's fine either way. Now you can touch it and see if it is where you like it to be. And boom. This is it. Now obviously you can use different colors and different shirt colors to go for whatever idea you want. And by all means you can mix colors, but cautious about mixing colors. Okay. That is the shirt. So at this point, now our shirts are done. There's a couple important things to remember when cleaning up. One thing to keep in mind is that plastisol is a plastic-based ink, and in order for it to properly dry, it needs to be cured. So keep in mind, if you get it on your hands, it's going to be wet and it's going to spread to every surface you end up touching. So it's important that you wipe off your hands till it's spread thin. That way you aren't spreading it everywhere. It's also important to keep in mind that we want to clean off as much plastisol and the cleaning station over there before moving on to the washout sink, because we don't want to put too much plastisol in the sink. We put as little as possible because it can very easily clog the drains. That is the class. I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to you coming to Factory 2 later.